This is part 2 of our biome unit. In part 1, you were able to learn about our rainforest and the desert biomes. You know that in the rainforest, there's 2 types of rainforest. There's the temperate rainforest and the tropical rainforest. Also know that the temperate rainforest is not too hot or not too cold, whereas the tropical rainforest is warm because it's near the equator, and it's humid because there's a lot of rain. And both of those receive over 300 centimeters of rain per year. We also talked about the desert and how the desert biome receives less than 25 centimeters of rain per year. And there's actually more evaporation that happens than precipitation. So that leads us to learn more about our next biome, which is the grassland biome. A grassland is an area. So a grassland is an area that is populated mostly by grasses and other non-woody plants. So populated by grasses and other non-woody plants. So this means no trees. There are no trees in the grassland, or very few. Now, most grasslands receive 25 to 75 centimeters of rain per year. So most grasslands receive 25 to 75 centimeters of rain per year. Although the prairie receives more rain than the desert, it does not receive enough rain for the trees to grow. Okay. So although the prairie receives more rain than the desert, it doesn't receive enough rain for trees to grow. Now, in the grasslands, the soil is rich and it supports the grasses that are as tall as you are. Now, there are 2 types of grasslands. The first type are called the prairies. It's located in the middle latitudes, like in Kansas, which is in the middle of the United States. Okay, so what does a prairie look like? Here's an example of the prairie. You can see all the really tall grasses and the wildflowers. Okay, those are simple plants that are able to grow in a grassland because they can survive without a lot of rain. Okay, and the second type of grassland is the savanna. Okay, and the savannas. When we talk about savanna as a grassland, it's not going to have an H on the end, like Savannah, like a girl's name, or Savannah, like Savannah, Georgia city. So savanna is the grassland. It doesn't have an H on the end. Now, this is located closer to the equator, and they're much hotter than the prairies. Okay, so the savanna grasslands are located closer to the equator, and that means that they're going to be a lot hotter. The savannas are also home to many of the largest animals on Earth, like elephants, bison, and also antelopes that are herbivores, and they help maintain the grasslands. So they don't get out of control. They have all of these different herbivores that are able to eat the tall natural grasses that grow in the savannas. Okay, so let's take a picture of the savanna. Okay, so you see there's sparse trees just not very close together, and there's tons of animals in the savanna, and they all graze on the grass. of this grassland. Okay, the next biome we want to discuss is the deciduous forest biome. Now, many of the trees in this forest are called deciduous trees. Now, these trees, they shed their leaves and grow new ones each year. So examples include oaks and maples. Now, deciduous forests receive enough rain to support the growth of trees. So it receives enough rain to support the growth of trees and other plants, which is at least 50 centimeters per year. So the deciduous forest receives at least 50 centimeters of rain per year. So it has enough rain to support the growth of those trees. And it also has a growing season that lasts 5 to 6 months. Now, how do some of these animals adapt to the changing weather in the deciduous forest? Well, some of these animals migrate or fly to warmer areas, or some hibernate or enter a state of greatly reduced body activity to kind of sleep during the winter. So that's hibernate. It's also important that you know that this is a biome that we live in. So even though it doesn't look like what you would think a forest would look like outside the window, before humans disturbed our ecosystem through construction and other ways, there are lots of trees that were here that are all deciduous trees. So think back before when we talked about secondary succession and how things had changed and how humans disturbed the ecosystem. Before anything here existed, there are tons of deciduous trees, and that's what makes this area a deciduous forest. Okay, a different type of forest is a boreal forest biome. Okay, now most of the trees in the boreal forest are coniferous trees. Which are trees that produce seeds and cones and have leaves shaped like needles. Now, another name for the boreal forest is the taiga, and that's the Russian name for the boreal forest, the taiga. And winters in this boreal forest are very cold. And the snow can reach well over your head. So there's tons of snow in the boreal forest and very cold temperatures. And that's during the winter in the boreal forest. But in the summertime, it's usually rainy. And it can be warm enough. I'm not saying this is warm, you're going to go swimming, but it's warm enough to be able to melt all the snow. So it can still be pretty cold, but just warm enough to melt all the snow. Now, trees in the boreal forest are well adapted to the cold climate. So trees in the boreal forest are well adapted to the cold climate because they have thick, waxy needles that help prevent water evaporation. And the animals adapt because they typically eat the seeds that are produced by the coniferous trees. So what do these coniferous trees look like? Well, you want to think of a Christmas tree. There's evergreen trees, okay, so like pines and firs and spruces. Those are all coniferous trees that have cones and needles. Okay, so that's what you would find in a boreal forest. Okay, the next biome that we're going to discuss is the tundra biome. Okay. Now the tundra is an extremely cold and dry biome. Cold and dry. So the tundra may receive no more precipitation than a desert. So the tundra may receive no more precipitation than a desert. Okay, so tundra is cold and dry. Now most of the soil is frozen all year, and that's called permafrost. Special type of soil. It also has plants that include mosses, grasses, and shrubs. Now, these plants, they grow closer to the land for several reasons. Okay, it's one of their adaptations because it's able to adapt to that cold weather in that way. That if they're closer to the ground, well, they're out of the way of the um, cold winds that are blowing that could cause it to fall over. And it's also closer to the ground, so it's getting more of the heat of the earth. Okay, so whatever heat that's there, that's available in such a cold place, they're able to grab that from the earth. And the mosses are able to grow in places where there's not even grass or soil. So mosses can grow in places that are just rock. And so permafrost isn't really that great of a soil. So that's why there's a lot of mosses there. Now, these plants only grow during the long days of the short summer season. Okay, so these plants actually only grow during the long days of the short summer season. And the birds in the tundra, they are able to migrate south during the winter. And that's how they are able to behaviorally adapt so that they migrate. But other animals are able to have a behavioral adaptation and they stay there in the tundra during the winter and they grow thick fur coats. And they grow thick fur coats. Okay. The next parts we're going to talk about, they're not exactly biomes, but they're different types of ecosystems, and that you need to understand those as well. So we're going to talk about freshwater ecosystems and then the marine ecosystem. Now, freshwater ecosystems include streams, includes rivers, ponds, and lakes. Now, streams begin at the top of a mountain. And as the stream flows, then you have other streams that will join it. And that larger stream, after have all these little teeny streams that come together, that's what you would call the river. Now, ponds and lakes are bodies of standing or still. Okay, so sometimes you might hear still water. Well, that's like standing, like a pond or a lake. It's contained and it's not running like a river. It doesn't really go anywhere. Okay, and it's still considered fresh water. Now, you might think, well, I've seen my pond and it doesn't look that fresh. Well, it doesn't matter if it has particles in it or not that would make it clean enough to drink necessarily, but it's considered fresh water because it does not have salt in it like an ocean. Okay, so any body of water that does not have salt in it would be considered fresh water. Okay, so what's the difference between a pond and a lake? Well, lakes are generally larger and deeper than ponds. So lakes are generally larger and deeper than ponds. And ponds are often shallow. They're often shallow enough that sunlight can even reach the bottom, even in the very center of the pond. And this helps a lot of plants to grow in the pond. Okay, this allows a lot of plants to grow there. So that's fresh water. Fresh water is when there's no salt. The next ecosystem is a marine ecosystem. Okay. And the marine ecosystem has salt. But the place that connects the freshwater rivers to the big marine ecosystem oceans would be a place called an estuary. And an estuary is where the fresh water of a river meets the salt water of an ocean. Now, many animals use this calm water that's in the estuary for their breeding ground. So they're able to make their nest there. Now, there are several zones then within the marine ecosystem, like when you go out to the ocean. Now, the intertidal zone is between the highest high tide line and the lowest low tide line. Okay, so when you ever go to the beach on vacation and you're looking to see where that high tide comes up on the beach, and whenever it's low tide, how far out it would go at the lowest point of low tide, that area in between is called the intertidal zone because, well, inter means between, and between the tides, where the water goes from the highest point of the high tide to the lowest point of the low tide. And you could actually see that on the beach. So we know that that's close to the rocky shore. The neritic zone is a region of shallow water that's below the low tide line, which extends over the continental shelf. So once you get past that, where the lowest low tide line would be, then the ocean just drops off and gets a lot deeper all of a sudden. Now, the sunlight is able to still pass through the neritic zone, so photosynthesis can occur. So it's not that deep yet, but it will seem deep to you. Okay? Like if you were just walking out in the ocean, it would be a big drop off where you couldn't touch anymore. So sunlight passes through the neritic zone so that photosynthesis can occur. And because the sunlight can filter through that, this area has a lot of coral reef and fish because wherever the sun can filter through, there's going to be lots of plants that are able to live there, and the fish are going to be able to eat those plants, just like we learned about with the food webs and food chains. Fish are the first level consumers that would eat your producers. Now, in the open ocean, the light penetrates only to a depth of a few hundred meters. Well, algae carries out photosynthesis in this region of the open ocean. So the only producers that are out here would be the algae. And this region is known as the surface zone. So if the algae is on the surface, it's still able to get that sunlight and be able to perform photosynthesis. But the deep zone is located below the surface zone. That makes a lot of sense. The deep zone is located below the surface zone and is almost completely dark. So most organisms are only able to eat the remains of other organisms that sink down from the surface zone. So any of those bottom dwellers who live at the very bottom of the ocean, the only thing that they're able to eat are able to eat just the remains of organisms that sink down from the surface zone. So that would make them what kind of animal? What are animals that only eat other animals, and they have to be dead animals? Okay, so we know that that would make those things that live on the bottom scavengers. Okay, so that wraps up all of the other mini biome lessons on all the other biomes, and we'll review this and take your test next week.